The sound arrives before the wind does. A long, metallic moan that rolls across the mangrove flats of the Sundarbans and lifts every hair on your neck. In a low-lying village an hour from Satkhira, a man in a red vest bangs a drum, the rhythm frantic and uneven as the sky closes in. Shelter! Shelter! Now, he shouts through a battery-scratched megaphone. The words vanish into the rising roar. Children are carried on hips, goats prodded along. A grandmother reaches back for a photograph, fingers shaking, then lets it fall to the dirt. The air tastes of salt and iron. Cyclone Mfanzai is still offshore, but the surge is already pushing the river backwards like a breath caught in the throat. Half a world away, at the same hour, a woman in Ahmedabad drapes a soaked sari over a window frame to catch a sliver of breeze. The electricity quit 20 minutes after sunrise. By noon, the alleyways are pale with heat haze, air warped as if the city is under glass. She fills a blue plastic jug from a tanker and splashes the water across her neck, over the hairline of the baby sleeping against her chest. On a community board, hand-painted letters spell out Heat Action Plan, and beside them a cartoon sun smiles unconvincingly, pointing to a list. Drink water. Rest in Sade. Check on the elderly. An ambulance horn wails and wails, somewhere beyond the low rooftops, as slow and continuous. As a warning bell, we call it the disaster era, as if it were a chapter in a book, the unspooling of storms stronger than memory, heat larger than maps, rivers that forget their banks. In conference rooms, under bright talking lights, people argue about what to do. Some swear by walls and plans, and drills a new breed of everyday heroism that accepts what's coming and makes room for it. Others point up the stack of smokestacks and say you can outsmart a sky Uris still loading with fuel. Adaptation. Mitigation. The words sit cold on a page. Out here, both try to become breathing things. On the Bangladesh coast, the drum beats multiply. Hillocks of concrete, square and severe, rise from the flatness. Cyclone shelters built on pillars, doors already open, stairs already crowded with sandals and swollen ankles. Inside, a woman named Farida scoops rice into a steel bowl with a hand that does not pause. Her neck scarf stuck to the sweat on her collarbone, her eyes flicking to the stairwell each time the wind climbs another step. Her son grips the shell of a radio and turns the dial, rolling past songs, past static, until the man's voice returns. Maximum sustained winds, 160 kilometers per hour, the voice says in clean, clipped Bengali. Storm surge expected 2 to 5 meters above astronomical tide. The words are clinical, and yet they quiver, alive, in a room filled with people who have learned to live by numbers like these. Above them, the roof groans. In a German village cradled in the Ahr Valley, men roll wine barrels up to higher floors. The air feels odd, like the wrong season. A little summer thunderstorm. People say, a shrug toward the river that has always been a neighbor, not a threat. On the hillside, the soil is already slick, water pooling in places. It does not usually pool. The siren system is old and patchy. Phones buzz with warnings that sound general, the way warnings do until they don't. A schoolteacher stands at her kitchen sink, watching the first brown curl of water push around the mailbox, the way a hand pushes aside a curtain. The clock on the wall says something ordinary and precise. She tries to remember where she put the candles. Meanwhile, far west, the Pacific Northwest is sweating through a day that has no analog in its last centuries. Asphalt softens. Power cables sag like overripe fruit. In a high-rise without air conditioning in Vancouver, a man sits on the floor of his living room with his legs in a bucket of water, counting to 60 and back. In Salem and Seattle, parks filled with families under foiled blankets, under stuttering mistas, under parasols that seem like jokes. The number on every thermometer is a dare. Elderly neighbors become names that will sit heavy on a line in a report. But right now they are eyes meeting across an apartment hall. You all right? I'm all right. The wait for night is a physical ache. In the Sundarbans shelter, a boy finds a gecko staring from the wall and laughs. Just once, bright as a bell. The world replies with hard rain that slants and needles. The river outside has ceased being a river. It is now the sea, flattened and muscled, climbing invisible stairs. In the corridor, a man with a gray mustache ties neon rope across the doorway, bows his head into the corridor, and inhales, as if he can tell by smell what the wind is about to do to them. The fluorescent light over the stairway flickers. Then the building concrete, massive. Confidence shifts a fraction as a wave wraps it, and every conversation drops away. On the radio, the voice crackles, warps, becomes a throat clearing, and is gone. The drumbeat stops. The doors bang inward once, twice, like giant hands testing a lock. Someone in the stairwell says the word embankment, the way you say mother or house when you think of what you could lose. The floor tilts. The megaphone clatters down the steps and comes to rest at a boy's feet, a hollow thing in the rising dark. Then, without warning, everything goes black. The black is not silence. It is a density filled with the sound of moving water, the hiss of it, shearing off concrete, the heavy slap as it finds new edges. Someone's phone becomes a torch, a small white island. The faces nearest it are slick with salt, their pupils wide. Children's fingers knit themselves into a rope down the corridor. A hand closes over Farida's wrist, unfamiliar and grateful. Outside, the embankment turthin, topped with a ribbon of brick, fails in a single abrupt motion like a zipper opening. A white coil of surge dunks the nearby palms and unroots a hut and floats away a chicken coop, the little doors swinging on their hinges as if letting out ghostly occupants. The cyclone roars through, the air alive with debris. A sari loops in a tree like a flag of surrender. Each wave that hits the shelter writes a new sentence in the concrete's bones. And for now those sentences all end with a period. In the corner stairwell, an old man named Hussein stands with his back against a pillar and the pillar against his back. He has held this pose before and is not ashamed that his mouth speaks 2 years at once. 2020 and 1970. He was a boy when Bola came, when the night bit and did not let go, when the winds were needles in his lungs, and he woke to a landscape of bodies. 300,000, maybe 5. Nobody then told them what a surging ocean would do, to land, to cattle, to history. There were no radios then, and no red vests, and no concrete islands. He watches a young volunteer retire rope, and thinks of the days when they fashioned them from torn sorrows and hope. When the wave takes a breath, he leans toward the boy and says, "Listen." The boy does. The stairs hold. Across the Bay of Bengal, in Orissa, a different storm is remembered each time the sky turns the color of grief. 1999. The super cyclone. 10,000 lives or more. Trees lying down in neat brown lines. Families hugging pillows, as if arms could substitute for architecture. But a decade later, in 2013, when Phelan swelled and spun, 1 million people moved in a human tide toward schools with steel shutters, toward shelters with names like promises. 99 deaths. 6 years after that, funny. Less than 100 in India. The line on the chart is not a straight line, but it bends toward knowledge. Sirens working, phones vibrating, volunteers on bicycles, loudspeakers bellowing scripts that practice made muscle. Amphan will repeatedly test that muscle. In that stairwell in Satkhira, the water reaches the second step, the third. The concrete shakes and then stills. A girl recites multiplication tables to keep her breathing even. A dog barks, stops, barks again. A mother's palm presses to a child's forehead, and notes heat that is not from fever but from fear. In Germany's Our Valley, dusk is losing its fight with a bruise-colored sky. The rain that afternoon had been the kind that leaves grass temporarily delighted, not the kind that rewrites maps. Then the rain did not stop. The phone alerts came in generic language about high water. The river, centuries a neighbor, knocked at the back doors at supper time. It tested the edge of the streetlights at 8. It piled cars at 9. At 10 it found its voice and used it. The school teacher, with the candles watches as the basement light goes. A gold square, blinking into nothing. She hears, through her window, someone say to someone else, "It's coming." She cannot tell if they mean the water or something underneath it. She grabs her father's old sweater and the tin box that contains a paper certificate that once guaranteed a safe future. The first wave climbs her steps with a lover's certainty. She pulls open her front door. Bad decision. The water makes itself welcome and the house exhales 30 years of dust and a single brown cough. Down the street, a volunteer firefighter who has not slept in 30 hours is waist deep, then chest deep. Then he cannot feel his feet. He is tethered to the station with a rope tied around his belly. He slaps a flat palm against a window and shouts for a family to come onto the roof. They don't hear him at first, because for the first time in their lives, the house is all noise. The kind that fills your skull and makes it impossible to think. When they do, there is no accessible way to the roof. The attic hatch is stuck. The father in the house breaks a window with a ceramic mug, cuts his forearm on the glass, and hoists his toddler onto the sill like an offering. The firefighter catches the child, and the child shrieks the way children do when the world takes the shape of panic. The rope at the firefighter's waist tightens. Someone at the station is pulling him back. He shakes his head, curses, and lunges again. The word mitigation sounds like a ruler across knuckles. The word adaptation sounds like a hand held out, palm up. They are both abstractions until they are not. In Ahmedabad, after a deadly heatwave in 2010 took hundreds of lives quietly in bedrooms and on bus benches, a city health commissioner refused to consider the deaths inevitable. They mapped which neighborhoods lost power first, which lacked trees, which clinic torsos came in hottest. They trained ambulance crews to recognize heat stroke without the thermometer you never have on the street. They made libraries cooling centers, printed maps of places to go that did not require money. In 2014, a stifling May arrived, and tens of thousands of text messages buzzed pockets before noon on the hottest days. Researchers later studied the mortality curves of that summer and saw the line bend. They do not have names for those saved. Their families do. In some apartments, the difference between too late and in time was a billboard with a number, a neighbor knocking. In Vancouver, a nurse closes her eyes for 1 second at 3 a.m. and opens them 9 minutes later because a monitor alarm yanks her back. There are 5 patients waiting on gurneys, all red-faced, delirious, if they can speak at all. Some of them old men who have outlived their fair share of winters and cannot find purchase against this summer. The air conditioner at the clinic's entrance is broken. The fans are roaring. The nurse looks down at her hands, and they look like someone else's. The ambient temperature is something like a number from a climate report you once shared on social media and then scrolled past. The firefighting team in the R Valley loses contact with the rope for a moment. The firefighter grabs a gutter and then loses it. The father on the windowsill disappears in a wall of brown. Another lamp goes out. The siren wails once more and then chokes into silence, drowned. In the coastal shelter, Amphan decides it is done with fury and shifts into exhaustion. The wind hurries away with the last of its insults. The water slouches back into the riverbed, spitting plastic and sod and dead fish. Inside, the darkness breaks apart into faces again. Someone laughs too loudly. The boy picks up the megaphone and shakes it, as if sound might fall out. The old man named Hussein lifts his hand and listens. There is a new sound now, distant, terrible. The embankment sheared clean. The water will not be tamed by the old lines when morning comes. The sheltered doors swing open and a smell like the inside of a rusted pipe comes in. Farida stands and slides her scarf back from her hair. "Now we go," she says, "to no one and to everyone," and steps into the slanted light. The first thing they see is a boat in a tree, on a rooftop in Germany. The schoolteacher forces herself through the attic hatch with a screwdriver and a prayer, her hands trembling so badly she drops the tool twice. She hears a neighbor shouting from 3 roofs away, a sound that is a braid of fear and instruction. The water tapers the street into a single muscular vein. She puts the tin box on her lap and looks up at a sky as calmly unhinged as a god. She is certain of only 2 things. What she taught her students about rivers was insufficient, and she will remember the face of the firefighter who banged on her window for the rest of her life if she has the rest of her life. Then the light behind the clouds goes a shade darker. The river finds the next house, and the wind makes a new noise. It sounds very much like the beginning of a different disaster entirely. The wind's new noise is brittle at first, the hiss of 1,000 tiny needles. In Northern California, it is the sound of leaves turned to tinder, of pine needles that should be damp but are not. Before sunrise, a spark raises where the maps predicted it might someday, and by mid-morning it is a line of flame behaving like a mind, choosing, ignoring, circling. In paradise, they have practiced evacuations, but practice is a straight line, and the fire comes in spirals. Dry grass meets embers, meets wind, meets topography. The first calls are calls from dispatch. The second calls are cries over baby monitors. Someone flips a switch, and nothing happens. The grid is a web, and parts of it are singing themselves into the ground. On the main road, brake lights turn the smoke red from within. A woman reverses into a ditch, throws the car into park, and runs with her toddler, the child tucked under one arm like a parcel too precious to drop. The sirens sound wrong, as if coming from underwater. Ash falls horizontally. At the edge of town, a stretch of forest that looked green and good the day before goes from landscape to engine. The fire leaps a two-lane road as if it were a narrow stream. The woman, coughing, bangs on a farmhouse door. No answer. She moves on, eyes streaming, mind focused on the nearest black line between two golden walls. Later, they will call this blaze the campfire, as if it were friendly. As if it happened on purpose. 85 lives lost. That number carved into the town's throat permanently. Even among those who flee, the survival is not clean. Air is hazard and smoke will creep, and lungs hold on to its memory. In Karachi, heat breezes like a presence that has entered the room without knocking. The fan above the kitchen table is turning, but its breath is a rumor. A boy's grandmother folds a wet cloth and places it on the back of his neck with the tenderness of someone folding a letter. He stares at the ceiling because to move is to light a small internal fire. The electricity keeps to a schedule only the utility knows. Antestrite, cart cells, cucumber shugad, with salt. In the hospital, a row of saline bags swings in the weak breeze of an oscillating fan. In Soma CDs, a school district opens gymnasiums, lines up cots, under fluorescent lights, calls them cooling centers, a phrase that is practical exactness. In others, a mosque opens its carpeted floor, or a temple sets out matting and jugs of water while a bulletin's board in front declares the hours in big letters. Heat advice feels obvious until your blood is a thicker liquid, until you are awake all night because your walls radiate a storage scorch. On a freeway in British Columbia, a line of ambulances is static, idling in a queue that feels like a cry. Their cargo is the human cost of ignoring the quiet disaster until it becomes loud. When the official count comes weeks later, it will turn out that more than 600 heat-related deaths occurred in British Columbia alone during the week. The heat dome sat on it like a hand. Across the border in Oregon and Washington, numbers will follow. But numbers arrive when the wailing is faded. In the moment, a paramedic's palm is on a forehead, and she is ordering ice packs and insisting a woman drink who cannot lift her head. The waiting room's vending machine is empty of water. A volunteer wrestles a pallet of bottles through the door and rips plastic packaging with her teeth. Back in Bangladesh, the day after Amphan, the great sorting happens. The village is a puzzle whose pieces were lifted in the night and dropped elsewhere. Maps are redrawn by hand. A child leads a goat by a nylon rope up the one dry path left along the embankment's new wound. The air is sour, wet, wood, sewage, fish, cut grass. The shelter's held. The death toll is counted like a prayer and a shame. 100 here, a few more there. Each number is a face somebody will wash and wrap, a hole in family calculus. But compared to the nightmares in Hussein's Headbolus tatters, Cedar's funeral's the difference. With a shape of hope, the radio breathes again, describes a line of storm shelters built after 2007. Talisips names a number of people moved in Len before landfall. Millions. The difference between catastrophe and cataclysm is stone and training. Rope and radio. A woman with a list knocking on doors in a storm. In Ahmedabad, city workers in yellow vests stand under a black banner. Heat kills actorly. They hand out homemade pamphlets, Hindi and Gujarati, side by side. Shade, water, rest. The head of the health department grinds her teeth, remembering the meeting a decade ago when the room went silent after the epidemiologist told them the last heat wave had killed far more than the official count. that so often heat takes you by pushing your body into a kind of failure it was already flirting with. The plan they wrote then was plain and personal. They identified neighborhoods thick with laborers, with tin roofs, with power that wavered, and put fixable ideas in place. New green spaces where they could push them into the budgets, painting roofs with reflective paints. Staggering work hours, training frontline workers to be suspicious of delirium and heat. A study later said it saved about 1,000 lives in one hot season. There were no funerals to prove it, and perhaps that is the nature of prevention. It is a victory that looks like nothing at all. In the R Valley, there's waiting. The water has not been kind. Raish never ease. Now it pulls back and leaves behind an inland sea of mud, indoors and outdoors. Equally, people climb down from roofs like they have been permitted to re-enter their own lives. They step into the streets and cry because the street is unrecognizable without edges. A car is in a bakery. A bench has been welded to a fence by silt. The man in the firefighter's gear sits on a curb with his head in his hands. Death tolls will settle, and they will be as brutal as anyone imagined in the mid-storm. More than 180 in Germany, others in Belgium. Newspaper editorials will demand who knew what when. Some will say the warnings were too technical. Others that the warnings were not heeded at all. The fissure between a forecast and a person's ability to act on it is its own kind of disaster. It is as real as any embankment. In Northern California, smoke makes day feel like late evening. Orange and apocalyptic. Horses have bandanas tied to their bridles. Chainsaws whine like insects. Somewhere a television continues its soap opera because the cable company did not cut service, and the juxtaposition is absurd. Later, analysts will pull satellite images and show how in places where fuels had been thinned, where controlled burns had been practiced, the fire slowed and crawled instead of sprinted. Houses there were approached by flame with less of an appetite. But those patches are small on a landscape drawn for a different century. In other neighborhoods, homes built with wooden decks and venting not meant to screen, embers became chimneys for their own undoing. Adaptation can be a house that refuses to burn when surrounded by fire, but it has to have been built before ignition and with intention, money, and time. A switch flips in a control room somewhere and dozens of cities go from day to rolling blackouts. Electricity thrums away from neighborhoods with a decisive click once every hour. In Lahore, the grid droops in the afternoon heat like a man on his knees. When the lights go, the fans become silent circles, perfectly useless. We like to believe that in the beginning of a disaster there is a single moment, and in the middle, a scream, and at the end, a lesson. There is rarely one of each. There are dozens, complicated by the fact that climate loads the dice, and our excellence and neglect both keep rolling them. A negotiator standing under an air conditioning vent in Bonn waves his laser pointer at a model that says 2 degrees above pre-industrial means a maritime climate that eats coastlines. 1.5 means a heat map of cities that manage their summers like a chronic condition instead of a terminal one. He looks tired as he says words like pathway and pledge. Outside, a student protest crossfades into a family texting to see who made it to the cyclone shelter in time, into a volunteer filling sandbags with a shrug and a stubborn jawline. None of them are thinking in degrees. None of them have time for the years between a promise and a trend line. The wildfire throws a leaping ember across a 6-lane highway. It lands in a median that was mowed last week. A sheriff's deputy watches, exhaling smoke, and wonders if the mitigation seminar he went to last spring was, in the end, a weather report dressed as a workshop. He taps ash from the end of his cigarette into the dirt with his boot. The ember dies. Another one lands. He moves his boot again. The sound, the wind, makes changes yet again. Another register down, as if the disaster is not a single song but an album, and the tracks advance whether or not we're ready. And under the orange daylight, under the buzz of tactical chatter on radios, under the shablacken fences and the muddied streets, another storm is organizing over South Asia, a season's worth of water lining itself up, ready to fall. The first drops on the parched plains slap like a promise. People lift their faces to the sky and send and whisper a word that tastes like relief. Monsoon. Then the rain does its old. He and Arrow was a work turning dust to smell of life and battering the zinc roofs with their familiar rattle. Fields wake up in a single, shared sigh. For a week, then 2. The unbroken sheets of rain are a nuisance that graces the rice. Then the river climbs the stairs. In 2022, Pakistan, the sky does not pause to listen to the land. Storm after storm trains over the Indus Basin, the moisture fattened by a warmer ocean, the air holding more water because physics is not an opinion. The rain arrives as if it is being tracked and deployed, as if someone were sending more to every square of map already hexed with dark blues. In the south, a man inches a new notch on his wall and a new one, and then he gives up. Photos of crescents of villages pressed into our screens, little islands cut off by brown seas. Bridges break as if they were made of chalk. 1 million houses gone. 2 million, the number of human beings caught between water and whatever was left of their past climes, until saying it aloud feels like a sin. Tens of millions. Estimates of deaths never captured the ones on the edge as the pregnant woman who bled in a boat because the clinic 5 kilometers away became a lake. The elderly man who survived the rising but could not make peace with a tent and the glare of the midday sun. Early warning systems existed. Government officials spoke on television. Maps were printed and taped to doors. Text messages fired out. But the pictures are of the space between information and shelter. The piled-up grief when the road is gone. When each boat can only carry 6, when one more ring from a phone somewhere along the chain would have saved a bitten child, when the school turned into a shelter does not have enough clean bathrooms, and the women stop drinking water to avoid the indignity of the walk across the yard at night. Scientists, later, from an international network that has made it their business to tell us when the Earth's fever has contributed to these humiliations, will say that the rainfall in the worst-hit areas was around halfway heftier because the planet was warmer than it should have been. Up to 50% will be the phrase that sticks in the minds of the few who can hear numbers while their hearts tear. They will put that percentage beside estimates of economic loss. Tens of billions, a number so large it erases itself. They will call it attribution. People in tent cities will call it rain. At a high table under cold lights in a conference center in Glasgow or Sharm el-Sheikh, delegates talk in the language of the future. They invoke net zero, a phrase that promises equilibrium like a lullaby promises sleep. On the slide, a graph shows the difference between 1.5 and 2 in bright colors that calm the anxious with their clarity. Fewer heat deaths, fewer hectares burned, fewer species with their names turned to past tense. Close in, a policymaker scribbles loss and damage and underlines it twice. The words carry legal weight. They also carry the weight of a home built by a man whose son will never learn to walk because the flood took his first steps and replaced them with silt. In Karachi, an apartment block built where the city ran out of patience with its own growth squats on the edge of a nullah. A drain dressed up like a stream on planning maps. The water climbs to the second floor and then settles into the daily rhythm of an encampment. From a balcony, a woman drops a rope with a bucket to a passing boat and hauls up lentils and bottled water. When the boat returns later with a volunteer doctor and magnesium sulfate for a girl with seizures, the woman thinks of all the other things it did not bring and swallows a laugh that would be a scream. Down the street, the municipal commissioner opens a thick book and finds the old plans for this neighborhood. There is a line that shows where the water should be, where the houses should not have been. He closes the book too gently for anyone else to hear and puts it back. In Germany, a hydrologist sits in front of a camera with makeup on his shiny forehead and tries to say something useful. He tries to say that a warning is not a guarantee, but it is a tool. That, what he and his colleagues said. A century flood was accurate in terms of rain, but inaccurate in terms of human understanding. He tries to say that sirens should be loud, that people should know exactly what to do when they hear them, that simulated floods need to feel like an evening's plan canceled, not a theoretical exercise. He tries to say that models that include a world where the air is a little thicker with moisture are not prophecies, but they are the closest thing we have to futures we can confirm or refuse. He ends up saying only, "We must do better," because the interviewer wants neatness, and there is none. In Ahmedabad under that black banner, the health commissioner looks at a map of all the Indian cities that have since called to ask how to write a heat plan that fits their budgets, their climates, their pride. She points out that in some places the first step is admitting there is a problem. In some places heat is considered a nuisance, not a killer, until a year when it is. She mentions that in recent years the national government is pushing an early warning for heat across the map, that states are drafting plans, that the World Health Organization has put out guidelines that cities translate as they can. Then she changes the subject because the person across from her doesn't want to hear about the parts of town where the pipes whisper. The clinics are few, and the roofs shine bare in the noon like cooking pans. She has a meeting with the water department in 20 minutes. This is the slow panic of adaptation. Steady, procedural, unglamorous work that will pay dividends only when something does not happen. On a dike in Zeeland, the Netherlands, where the North Sea flooded the land in 1953, killing more than 1,800 in one shivering night. A child stands with her grandfather and looks out across water, pushed back by men who learned a type of control that is always temporary. The deltworks have stood like fist and open palm for decades now. Sluices and barriers, a symphony of engineered hesitation that turns storm surges into news items instead of history. But the sea does not care about history, and the sea will rise. Thousands of kilometers away, in Japan, despite meticulous seawalls and evacuation routes. 2011's triple disaster reminded everyone that thresholds are not walls, that wave heights can be guessed at, but not bargained with. The grandfather points to where the 1953 flood reached, and his granddaughter imagines a line across the current water that is both invisible and all she can see. On a fire line in New South Wales, as the black summer approaches its peak, a volunteer with soot on his teeth grins at a colleague who has lost his eyebrows and says, "We save what's in front of us, that's all." In his head he rehearses what he will say to his wife if he has to tell her that the house went. He will begin with "we," because that makes the failure communal. He will end with a promise he cannot guarantee. Next time we'll be ready. He knows that the only readiness he can speak of with confidence is the small circle of fuel break they cut yesterday. The cleared gutters, the ember guards. He knows that mitigation is the work invisible to him. The coal mine he drove past last year becoming a solar farm someday. The political will slipping its gear into another notch. In a tense city in Sind, a girl ties her dupatta across her face against the smell and uses a stick to draw in the mud. She draws a house with a roof that is a triangle and a door that is a square. She draws a line for the water. The line is low, where it should be. She glances at the real water, the one she will get used to stepping around, and then back at the line she has made. She undoes it with her stick and lifts her eyes because someone is clapping, calling children to line up for bread. It will be another 6 months before a monsoon like that lets go of her, even though it lasts a season on the calendar. The negotiator, now in a different city, straightens his tie and prepares to say what he has said before and what he fears will be true again. We are not on track. He hopes the word "we" is comforting, that it implies shared ownership of failure and therefore a shared ease of later success. He thinks about a study on his desk that estimates 37% of heat-related deaths over the last decades can be attributed to the additional warmth humans have infused into the air. He thinks about a line at the end of the report that limiting warming to 1.5 degrees rather than 2 could mean millions fewer exposed to lethal heat. That the line between those outcomes is every ton of carbon not sent skyward, and every leaf planted, and every early warning message that reaches a hand that can act. Someone in the room asks the question again, the one that is all spine and no softness, which is saving lives now. It hangs and hums. The answer cannot be a slide. Outside, a family on the Karachi balcony drops their bucket to the boatman in the flood again, and he ties it off with a flourish, handing them back a little brown packet of antibiotics and a bag of onions. A breeze blows across the water, carrying with it a smell of rot and something marvelously alive. The woman lifts the packet to her chest. The boatman looks up. For a second, beneath the buzz of the flies and the drone of the news from everywhere else, this is all the world. A bucket, a rope, and the grip of fingers at both ends. The clouds fold once more. The river finds a new language for threat, and the Hita prepares to return. Morning in Ahmedabad is a mercy. The first light is the color of a peach, and the shadows are generous. A city worker in a yellow vest unlocks the door to a library before the official hour and props it with a stone. The cool inside, like a note slipped into a clasped hand. A grandmother arrives early, her grandson strapped to her back with a length of cloth, and thanks the woman with an inclination of her head that costs less than any budget line and means more. On the wall, a poster whispers the same simple things. Drink water, Rest in sade. Check on your neighbor. A paper in a medical journal will never capture the moment a teenager with a whistle walks down a lane at noon and cajoles a gang of rickshaw drivers to sit beneath a tree and drink from a tub of water he has filled because a script told him to. But lives, say, reside in these mundane acts. In the way the city council fast-tracked a network of cool roofs, painted white across entire neighborhoods, and the streets beneath them felt, on the hottest days, like someone cracked a window in a locked car. On the Bengal coast, Farida stares at the leveled line where her house once stood and then turns toward the shelter where, for now, a tarp and a cot and a shared kichua. Not an indignity, but a proof of a promise gap. Volunteers in those same red vests she saw in the storm reappear with clipboards. This time they carry lists of the elderly and pregnant to prioritize for aid. This time, too, a woman with a stethoscope appears, trained in the months between storms to catch cholera before it catches everyone else. In the high school, 2 floors up, a chalkboard has fresh writing. Names of villages checked. Hand pumps that draw clean. Latrines that need repair. A man reads the words aloud and nods. The cyclone shelters. The raised plinths for homes. The networks of shouted instruction and practiced steps. These are the scaffolds of adaptation. Statistics sit beside them like trophies you Dante display, because celebration would misread grief. From hundreds of thousands lost half a century ago to hundreds today, even as the storms themselves sharpen. In Orissa, a woman holds her child's hand and points to the sky and says, when the men on the loudspeaker say go, we go. There is grace in that obedience, but also agency. She knows who runs the ward committee, where the key to the shelter is, what to bring to the school when it opens its doors. In the late morning, the same loudspeaker will tell her the date of the next drill. She will show up. She will ask for more water, for a doctor in the shelter at night, and she will get both, because trust is a savings account you fill in quiet years and spend in loud ones. And still, a month later, a man in Sindh will stand at the edge of a new lake that was once his field and say to a camera, what can preparation do against the sky? He is not wrong to be skeptical. Some disasters break the ceiling of our plans. Some losses cannot be beaten back with sandbags and hashtags and grit. This is where mitigation steps out of the pages and into a hospital room, air thick with smoke, that would be thinner if coal had been retired years ago. This is where a schoolyard shaded by trees is both an Adaptation, a cooler place to take recescent, a mitigation, a handful of carbon pulled into trunks and soil. This is where a city shutters a coal plant and opens a solar array and the asthma ward quiets. Long before the global climate notices the change. This is where a nation redraws its building code for fire and heat, and at the same time redraws the subsidies that nudge its economy toward cleaner fuels. The lines between the two camps blur in practice, because both carry people toward survivability. In Los Angeles, summer of a different year, wildfire smoke makes a yellow noon and school buses run their routes anyway. Children climb aboard wearing little paper masks. Not the right kind, but something. The school district has a plan now. Air purifiers humming in classrooms. Filters replaced on a schedule that takes itself seriously. Outdoor play staggered across hours when the index dips under a threshold their new policy board can recite. The city's climate office sends a message to residents by phone about indoor air. And because a pandemic taught everyone how to carry rules in their pockets, people actually read it. In Northern California, a neighborhood that invested in firewise practices, metal roofs, boxed-in eaves emerges with charred fences and unburned homes. A study maps the fire edge and shows how it ran the gauntlet and lost interest there. The difference looks like an intact mailbox and a child's bicycle still bright blue under a layer of ash. On Vancouver Island, 2 years after the heat dome, the mayor reads from a binder as a journalist points a microphone at him. He speaks of trees planted, misting stations installed, funds put aside to subsidize window units for low-income seniors. He speaks of a new power substation, rerouted away from a floodplain, and a cool corridor carved from one side of town to the other. Like a shaded vein, he says, we were lucky, and then caressed himself. We were late, and then we learned. The nurse who once fell asleep between alarms stands beside him. Hair pulled back, a little smile precise as a comma, and does not contradict him. In Brussels, a quiet team calculates deaths averted by clean air because a continent forced itself to breathe less poison in the last decade. Across China, the soot between a man's teeth listens in the winter because the coal plant in his province was closed and replaced with wind and solar at a pace that feels like a miracle and like the bare minimum. The climate ledger frowns at the sum total. It wants more and faster, but the clinic ledger shows the parts that matter to families. Fewer children wheezing, fewer strokes, fewer hearts giving out on bad days. These are not disasters with names, but they are their own slow disaster turned away, and they are the co-benefits that prove mitigation is not only a love letter to 2050, but a bouquet on today's kitchen table. We can weigh them, if we must. Adaptation has saved lives right now, in present tense, in stairwells and libraries and flood shelters. In the extra minute an early warning buys a man on a roof. Mitigation has saved lives too, in the present, in the lungs not filled with in the heat that did not attack because a city painted its roofs, planted its shade, lowered its energy demand, and got its energy from gentler sources. But mitigation's largest gift is deferred and profound. The disasters that do not come, the storm that is not quite that big, the river that forgets to reach the doorstep, the ambulance that does not become a hearse. The argument is loose only if you pretend time isn't part of the calculus. If you fold time in, the answer is twofold. Adaptation saves the life in front of you. Mitigation saves the lives out beyond the horizon. Hussein, in Bangladesh, watches his grandson watch the river and thinks of the line between storms drawn in concrete, and in the minds of people who now move. When told, he knows they need higher embankments and better drains. He knows his daughter's mobile phone is in a drawer because it cost too much to charge it this week. He says, out loud, we will build again, because that is both defiance and routine. The German school teacher, months after the water retreated, sits at a meeting in the town hall where they are drawing new maps. She raises her hand and asks about sirens. She raises it again and asks about building in the floodplain. She raises it again and says, when I called, the line was busy. Can we fix that? They do not make her a hydrologist by the end of the evening, but they give her things to carry out into the street. A pamphlet that does not insult her, a schedule for the next drill, a comfort she does not trust yet. She will tell her students that day what she wished she'd even told. When you hear the siren, go up. When the app flashes red, find your plan. In Pakistan, the boatman who tied the bucket with a flourish gets a job with a local NGO that is building raised latrine platforms and training women to test water with strips that turn blue if cholera is lurking. He has a laminated card now and a bicycle given to him by a man who said his hands were tired of pushing it through silt. He cycles down the street at dusk, ringing a bell, reminding people where the clinic will be on Thursday. What number to call for the next time the river pretends to be the ocean. The negotiator in a different city after a different year steps out of a plenary and breathes the air. It smells like air. He closes his eyes and sees the graphs that make up his days. The lines that mean things to him that they do not to his neighbor. He thinks of the sentence he could end on, that would not be a lie. If we do what we know how to do, we save lives twice. He says it, quietly, to no one, and then louder to the room when he goes back inside. He is not the hero of this story. He just wants to be one of the people who did not look away. In a library in Ahmedabad, the air conditioner hums. The boy with the wet cloth on his neck is older now and is sprawled on the cool tile next to a shelf of books about cricket. His grandmother, sitting in a plastic chair with a paperback pressed flat in her hands, taps his ankle with her toes. He smiles, groggy and grateful that relief can feel like boredom. Outside, the heat leans against the building like a drunk. Inside, people breathe. And everywhere, the question posed under studio lights dissolves in the face of answers that look like the way a community knows where to go when the sky turns. The way a city tells its people to drink water and then makes sure they can. The way a country chooses the quieter energy over the loud one, which is saving lives. The drum and the door, the whistle and the wind farm, the bucket tied to a rope, and the ramp shut to a coal ship. The age of either or ended when the rivers learned new ways to speak. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.